Hi. I wanted to have a bit of a talk today about PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. And the reason I wanted to do a podcast on this, it's not just because it's something that I have been dealing with for years, but it's probably the most, or one of the most misunderstood mental illnesses. And part of that is because everybody thinks they know what it is, but they don't really. And there's a lot of misconceptions and there's a lot of misinformation out there. So I feel it's my duty as a survivor to shed some light on what PTSD looks like, what people look like who have PTSD, and just give an idea of what can happen to those who are facing the struggles of PTSD on a daily basis. I don't want this to be a downer kind of podcast, but I want it to be informative and I want people to understand exactly what it's like. And so I guess the first thing that I can explain is what is PTSD. So the way I describe it to people, and I'm going to preface this with I'm not a doctor, and I'm explaining it to you as someone with PTSD. So I'm not going to give you the scientifics. I'm going to give it to you in a way that I'm hoping will make sense to you and that you can understand. I found that this was the best way for me to get my message across when I was explaining it to my loved ones and people I knew. And it took me years to figure out how to say it. And it was in a trauma therapy program that I was in that one of our counselors was able to explain it to us. And we all kind of went, yes, that's exactly what it is. Because it's even hard for us to put it into words and to explain what exactly happens when someone is diagnosed with PTSD and has to live with that. So, the best thing that I can get you to do is I want you to imagine a time where you felt scared, you were fearful. And by that I mean not just watching a horror movie hiding behind a pillow fear scared. I want you to think of a time in your life where you thought you were in real danger, whether that be an almost car accident, whether that be, thinking there is somebody breaking into your house, whether that is, somebody is lost in a store and you can't find your child. So think of whatever moment that is to you. And I want you to think back about how that felt. What did you feel in that moment? The terror, the anger, you're in a state of being unable to process, almost in shock, what is happening. But your heart rate goes up, your breathing becomes shallow, and it's hard to get in breath. You start to shake maybe, and perhaps you even start to scream. Maybe your reaction is to cry. We all have different reactions to that kind of stress and to that kind of fear. So when we get to a point where we're feeling fear like that, we do one of three things. We fight to save ourselves, we freeze because we don't know what to do and we're so panicked, we're paralyzed, or we flee. So it's fight, flight, or freeze are the three things. And we all choose one of those. If you and I were in a cabin in the woods together and a bear managed to open the door and walk into the cabin with us in it, we would both experience an exorbitant amount of fear because a bear just walked into the cabin. But the way you react to it may be different than the way I react to it. I may freeze because I don't know what to do. I've never had a bear walk into my home. You may freak out, grab the closest thing to you, and prepare yourself to fight the bear if needed. Somebody else may break a window and jump out and, run out the back. So we all have various options when we get to that place of fear. And it can change depending on what that trigger is, whatever is happening. How we react depends on what is happening to us in that moment. So I want you to imagine what that feels like. Almost everybody has been through something where they feel like they escaped something bad happening. And that fear, that feeling of fear is very prevalent, that we can all remember it because it is unlike anything else we experience. So imagine if you had that feeling 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Think about that for a second. That heightened state of fear, what you feel in the exact moment that you recognize a grizzly bear coming in your front door. Imagine that feeling and what it would be like to have it all day, every day. That is what post-traumatic stress disorder is like to live with. You are in a constant state of fear. And yes, you have moments where you're smiling, and you have moments where you're functioning. But something can happen, and in a heartbeat, it triggers you. And it puts you into a state of panic that is exactly like that feeling you felt when there was that I could die moment. And it's such an incredible thing to live with because you never fully understand what is happening, why it's happening. Sometimes you understand what your triggers are, sometimes you don't. Sometimes things creep up on you and you don't understand why you're reacting the way you are. Sometimes you never understand it, and other times it could take you weeks to figure out what happened in that moment that triggered you and made you go into that trigger, that moment of panic. So imagine living your life never knowing when those things were going to hit you. And you're constantly living in fear. You're afraid of what is to come. You're afraid of everyone because you're unsure of what the dynamic will be with that person. And so all of a sudden, you don't want to go out in the world anymore because it's a scary place and your brain is already not working the way other people's brains are working. PTSD is a brain injury. So if you imagine your brain like a computer, you've got your amygdala, and the amygdala it's kind of the fire hose that if things overheat or things get panicked, it sprays you down, it cools you down and says, calm yourself, you're fine. Well, somebody with PTSD, that amygdala is offline. That flap, that hose doesn't come out. And so when there's that moment of panic, that fire starts, that amygdala isn't working for you to shut it down and to tell you everything is okay. So then your brain starts working overtime. And what happens when you're triggered is that even though something scary is happening in present time, and your brain is trying to rationalize what is happening and figuring out, because it's supposed to be sending messages to your body goes into an automatic reaction of reliving the trauma that you endured And there's a disconnect almost that happens between your brain and your body. Because for me, I could always say, you're being irrational, but I couldn't stop physically what was happening to me in that moment. And so sometimes I would start to shake. Sometimes I was gasping for breath. I couldn't breathe. Sometimes I was paralyzed and I couldn't move a muscle. So even though my brain was saying, you're fine, you're okay, you're being irrational, my body was reliving the trauma all over again. And what's even scarier is that, like I said, you don't always know when those triggers are going to happen. So there's this unsure circumstances that happen that make you afraid to venture out into the world. It's the uncertainty of whether or not you are going to encounter something that is going to trigger you and set you back. And the thing is that it doesn't just last a few minutes. Sometimes the initial reaction trigger is just a few minutes, but oftentimes it's much longer than that. There are times it would put me out for weeks. Weeks. So you learn to stock your pantry. You learn to have extra paper towel, toilet paper, things of necessity in your house because you are never sure when you're going to be triggered and you are never sure when will be the next time you will walk out your front door. So that is what PTSD is. Now, who gets PTSD? A common thing that I found is that a lot of people would say, how do you have PTSD? You're not a first responder. You're not a soldier. And yes, it's very true that so many of our veterans and so many in our first responders teams suffer and deal with PTSD, which is understandable. They face traumatic events on a daily basis. And so absolutely, that is certainly true that they do have a high rate of PTSD. But that's not it. Anybody who has had any sort of trauma in their past can develop PTSD. And some people can experience the same trauma, and one person will develop PTSD and one will not. It happened with my mom and I, with my brother's suicide. I did develop PTSD and my mom did not. And so she saw what I was going through and didn't necessarily understand. Thank goodness she was super supportive. Why she didn't get it, I don't know. She doesn't know. But the reality is that you can't say, well, for sure, that person is going to get PTSD. That's for a doctor to diagnose and discover. But the fact is that it's not just soldiers and it's not just first responders. You can be in a car crash and develop PTSD. You can have excessive years of abuse from childhood that results in PTSD. And sometimes you don't even know it until years later. Or something happens that brings it to the forefront. Sometimes it could be a surgery gone bad. Other times it can be somebody facing a serious illness, whether it be cancer or Parkinson's, whatever, it doesn't matter. What matters is that people who face a serious illness are facing some pretty hard odds. The odds aren't in their favor. And of course they develop PTSD, and most times it's when they recover and it becomes that fear of it resurfacing. It's that fear of the cancer coming back. And so it can be a number of things that can affect somebody enough that they end up with that diagnosis. So let's just get that clear. It can happen to anyone. What is it like to live with PTSD? For 7 years, I thought I thought I was in hell, and I thought I was going to die. And by that I mean I wanted to die. With PTSD comes suicidal ideation. And so every day was a struggle, and I spent every day making a choice to stay alive. And some days were easier than others. Some days were a struggle and required me to reach out for help or to go into a hospital. You also deal with insomnia, nightmares. For the first year or so after my brother died, I would wake up 4:30 every morning without fail. And I didn't understand the connection at the time. And I just knew that I would wake up screaming at 4:30 in the morning. I was plagued with nightmares. I was afraid to close my eyes because of what was going to come out in my dreams while I slept, if I slept. And every day at 4:30 in the morning, I would wake up screaming. I didn't make the connection until talking to my psychiatrist. My brother died at 4:30 in the morning. And my brother died by suicide. I've said that before. He chose to die by lying down in front of a train. I was not there to witness what happened, but I did have to be in the room with the police officer who had to deliver the news and their full investigation of that event. So we heard information that nobody should ever have to hear. And I saw my mom break down, crumple to the floor, and beg to see him. And the police officer started to cry and said he didn't recommend that we did. And of course, we knew why. So that is what my nightmares were plagued with. I would wake up screaming because my dreams were as if I was watching that accident and the impact happen as though I was watching from above. And this happened on a daily basis. So imagine living with that. And that's my account. I can't speak for everybody else. They have their own nightmares. They have their own issues with insomnia. It's common. We talk about it in support groups. But it happens so regularly that your sleep is affected. And as most people know, when your sleep is affected and you are not getting effective rest that your body needs to heal and to recuperate, it becomes this vicious cycle. And so there are things in your body that start breaking down as a result of the lack of sleep. You also deal with triggers. Like I said, you don't always know what those are, and sometimes you do. And I can tell you, I avoided a lot of things knowing that they would trigger me. Um, I had a hard time driving by a school I used to work at because it triggered me. I still have a hard time driving over the bridge of where that school is. I have a hard time seeing some family members because it triggers me. Trains were a big trigger for me. And the first time I heard a train in the distance, I was with my mom. We were planning at my brother's funeral. And I didn't even recognize the train, but my body stopped, shut down. I fell to the ground and I couldn't move. And I was in the middle of a parking lot. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. It was like I saw tunnel vision. My mom had to turn and come back for me, didn't understand, thought I fell. And then when she saw that I couldn't breathe and that I couldn't move, she realized that there was something going on. And that was a scary thing for me when I recognized that I was hearing the train in the background and that that's what rendered me paralyzed. The next time that happened, I was in a car and I paralyzed behind the wheel. I had to pull over. I stopped. I couldn't breathe. And so it became a scary thing for me, again, to go out in the world for fear that I would see a train or a subway. And I was afraid of conflict and confrontation because part of my anxiety and my depression and my triggers were because of the way I was treated by some family. And so I was afraid of confrontation and I would avoid people at all costs because I couldn't handle that confrontation. And if there was anything of the kind, it would render me pretty much non-functioning for days, weeks. You never knew. It was a process. So you couldn't work. I couldn't work. I couldn't do a whole lot. I didn't have the concentration. And at times I still don't have the concentration. I used to love to read books all the time reading. And I can't read like I used to because I don't have the attention span to be able to, or the mental clarity, I think, to be able to forward on through a book. And so sometimes there are books that I have been trying to read. There's one in particular that I've been trying to read for 3 years. I will get there. Um, Crowds are usually a problem, and loud noises for people with PTSD. And we talk about that in my groups as well. And why is it? We don't know, but it's the agitation of a loud noise can bring on those feelings of fear. And so being in a classroom for me with a lot of children yelling and making noise became difficult, and it agitated me. And I didn't ever want to be that teacher that would blow up and explode. And I started to feel like I didn't think I could handle that anymore. And life has a way of making things happen for you. And I ended up leaving that job for various reasons. That's a topic for a whole other podcast. But things that I loved and adored, I didn't anymore. I had no joy left. I didn't see the beauty in things like I used to. I felt numb. I felt like I would never feel again. I would get angry or I'd cry so easily at the most absurd things, and I didn't know or understand why. So I thought that that was going to be my life forever. And in part of the discovery, in understanding myself as this new person, this new diva, was also bringing up things from my past and realizing that there were some relationships in my past that started this journey of PTSD long um, before my brother's death. And even 2 weeks prior to my brother's death, there was an intruder in my home with intent to kill me. So I ended up with a diagnosis of complex PTSD, which is multiple traumas back to back. And then, discovering some stuff from my childhood, big chunks of my childhood that I blocked out, and suddenly having flashbacks and remembering certain things. So all this happening, I was thinking for sure I was on this journey that I was going to have to deal with PTSD for the rest of my life. I thought it was a life sentence, and I didn't think I could handle it. And then things started to shift. I was living in Toronto, so I was living in a big city with a lot of people, a lot of angry people, which wasn't helping. Every time I had to go out for anything, I was scared because I didn't know the reaction I would get in whatever circumstance, whether it be a snowstorm and people driving or just some of road rage, whatever it was. I made the decision to move back to my hometown, which is a small little town, about an hour and 20 minutes northwest of Toronto. And it was probably the best thing I could have done for myself and my healing. There was a peace and a serenity here that helped me heal and gave me the chance to heal because I didn't have as many triggers here. I was able to reconnect with some people that I grew up with, and that was really great. And I would drive around town and I'd have these flashbacks and memories of my brother and I, and they were good memories. Right. And so that started to be healing because I stopped seeing the suicide and I started seeing the good memories. And that helped my heart. And I was in um, a group of people on Facebook that support group for people with PTSD. And understand there's almost 24,000 people in some of those groups. And that should give you a bit of an idea of just how many people are trying to function with PTSD. And so there's often questions that come up and we try and help each other. And a lot of it is people needing affirmation and needing to hear that somebody else is feeling the way they are. And somebody said they had just got diagnosed and how long was everybody else dealing with PTSD? And I was skimming the answers, and there was one person who wrote 43 years and counting. And I thought, hell no, there is no way that I can do this for that long. I would choose death before I would choose to live in that state of panic and fear. And at first it rattled me and it upset me. And then I thought, I need to take charge of this. And I was feeling in a better place because I was living in a place that was more serene. I was surrounded by nature. There was no noise pollution. It was quiet. You could see the stars at night. It was just all this beauty all around. And I thought, I need to take charge of my healing. And I did anything and everything I could to get myself back on track. So, I tried yoga, I tried tapping, I went to different therapy groups. I ended up getting into a trauma program, which was incredibly helpful in helping give me the skills, the coping skills to maneuver through triggers, understanding it better. And it was with a wonderful group of people too, and I still remain close to them now because there's a camaraderie that happens. You belong to a club that you never really wanted to join, but there you are, and you find comfort in knowing somebody understands how you feel and what you're going through. Not everybody does. I've lost a lot of people as a result, whether they made fun of me having PTSD. And, that happened within my own family, that happened within some theater groups that I was a part of, that it was just not understood enough. And so it hurt to know that I was losing people, but at the same time, People come in and out of our lives all the time. And so sometimes when you're on a healing journey, you do lose people. Some people don't know how to deal with what you're going through. And I learned to accept that and to forgive that. And that was a big freeing moment for me. And I thank those people for being in my life for whatever amount of time it was. I lost two best friends. I lost so many relationships, but I wouldn't change any of it because it has made me who I am today. And it has brought me here to this moment, telling you my story and being able to provide you with information and for us to be able to talk about these terrible, ugly, dark things and know that it's okay that we're talking about it. And I can bring you guests who have these fascinating stories of survival so that we can heal together and we can go on this journey in life and understand that we've got this community of people that are trying to do the same, and we can support and love and help each other. That's really the important takeaway from this story, is how can we do these things together? Because nobody should ever feel alone in dealing with their mental illness. And unfortunately, most of them make you feel alone and make us feel that we can't talk about it because it makes people uncomfortable. But it's not about being uncomfortable. It'd be like you and I talking about somebody having cancer, somebody having diabetes. Yeah, their life is different. And yeah, it's not great and it sucks. But that doesn't make us any less human. And it doesn't make us any less of a person who needs love and support. So, whether things are going great in your life or whether you're facing difficult issues as well, you're never alone. What can you do to make somebody else feel like they're not alone? It's like in the musical, and you all know I'm a musical theater geek. In the musical Dear Evan Hansen, you will be found. You will be found. There are people here for you. I'm here for you. We are all here for each other. Let's spread that message and let's start holding people up when they need a hand. Because when that person's well, they're going to turn around and hold you up too. So let's create this community. Let's understand these illnesses and let's get on this road to mental health so that we can do away with mental illness.